Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Ash. Today, we are going to look at the news media and its role in elections and our local community here in the Bay Area. We are joined by ABC 7's news anchor, Dan Ashley. Dan, thanks for joining me today.
Jared, it is great to be with you and on Capstone Conversations. Thanks so much for having me.
Dan, you've been a fixture in the Bay Area for a long time as the anchor of the evening news in multiple slots, but tell us a little bit more about your background and your history.
I've been here in San Francisco for 30 years now, and as the evening news anchor at ABC 7, the Disney-owned and operated television station. Just a terrific organization, terrific place to work, and I've been very fortunate to be there for such a long time. I grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, the Go Tar Heels, and I worked in the Raleigh-Durham area on radio and on television for about a year and a half, or maybe a little bit more, and then moved to Charleston, South Carolina, where I was there for about 8.5 years as the evening anchor and investigative reporter. My last 5 or 6 years there, and then moved to California and KGO in 1995. And it's been a terrific experience. I've been a journalist for 40 years, just about. And it's the job that I have always wanted to do and became really fascinated with in college and found the direction to really pursue it in a meaningful way. And it's been a heck of a ride, Jared.
I got to start by asking a Tar Heel question as most of my audience is getting to know, I'm an ACC fan at Florida State. Chapel Hill has a new football coach coming in with Bill Belichick, the 8 Super Bowl rings. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was stunned, actually. I think a couple of things. One, I think what a terrific resource for the university to be able to tap into, given his extensive track record and his amazing success at driving football teams to the highest level of professionalism and championships. It'll be interesting to see how he relates to and deals with college athletes instead of professional athletes. It's a different ball game. My suspicion is he's somewhat different behind the scenes with the club than he is within his public persona, which seems so stern and humorless. I think he's probably a little bit different when you get him one-on-one or inside the locker room or out on the practice field. But I think it's a great move. I also did not realize that he has a history in Chapel Hill. So homecoming exactly, but he gets it. He's been around UNC and Chapel Hill and college athletes. I think it's cool. It's interesting. It's certainly a marquee move.
It is, and I think it can help with recruiting just because of his Rolodex and his fame. College football overall and college sports is dealing with the NIL and name, image, likeness, and the transfer protocols that have been happening at record speeds, and it's just changing overall.
The game is totally different. On one hand, I get it because everyone's making a lot of money on these college programs except the athletes. But on the other hand, they're students first. They're not professionals, not like semi-pro. But I understand both sides of that equation. On the positive side of that, Jared, you raise a very interesting point. Because of his background in the NFL, he understands the marketing of players and the ability of athletes to make money. That's not foreign to him at all. That won't be. I think that's a bigger adjustment. People who've only coached at the amateur or college level to suddenly have players making a lot of money. In some respects, he may not have a hard time adjusting for that.
Let's look at 40-year news career. It has changed in that time. Just going back 40 years, cell phones weren't in everybody's pocket 40 years ago, right? How has it changed? How has your reporting had to change? How has technology changed in your industry?
My hair's gotten gray. That's one big change. Yeah, it's changed dramatically out in terms of technology. We had two-way radios in our news vans. We did not have phones or any of the we didn't have laptop computers. We had to race back to the television station on 3/4-inch videotape and edit the videotape linearly. My first job was a videotape editor, so I know a lot about that. The technology around what we do has changed. We don't need necessarily microwave and satellite trucks like we used to. We can use these cell phone driven packs that dial 7 different cell phone lines into the station for backup. We can go live from places we used to not be able to go live from. For example, underground at a BART station. If there's cell service, we can be live down there, where before we had to have a line of sight microwave signal to a transmitter tower or receiver tower. So that's changed. All the technology around it has changed. The other major change is if you look at the days that when I grew up watching Walter Cronkite, Eric Separide, David Brinkley, on and on, Frank Reynolds, et cetera, even before Jennings, Brokaw, and Rather, they reported the news and that was it. Whatever they said, take as fact, and they did a very good job of doing that. But there wasn't social media. There wasn't the internet. You couldn't Google. We had to take it on faith that what they were telling us that was happening in Vietnam or in Washington or wherever was accurate and fair. Now, we very much have a two-way conversation with our audience because of social media and the internet. It's a very engaging way to do this job. The mistake isn't even out of my mouth when someone's tweeting, look at what this idiot said. That's different. But rather than me just report to viewers, report back to me, and we engage in a conversation. What is the same, though, Jared, exactly the same in my mind, is the need and desire of people to have accurate, fair, updated information. The essential role of the journalist to go out and ask questions, gather facts, and report the news has not changed. We do the same job in different ways, formats, with different technologies and techniques, but it's the same essential job. Now, it's also changed in terms of all of the cable outlets and everything online and social media. There's much more partisanship among the audience and the media. You don't see that reflected very much in local media and even the national, the major networks. You don't see that. But certainly on cable, you see a bit more of that. Hey, this broadcaster, this network tends to lean left, or this one tends to lean right. You don't really see that locally and at the national level with the mainstream broadcast network.
With that, there's a lot of questions about truth and what is news. And you're right. We had to take Walter Cronkite for his word. There have been a lot more lies and a lot more exaggerated statements by multiple political candidates of every party in the last couple of years. How does the news media take on that as a challenge?
I think the way we need to take it on is to be very direct about it and ask tough questions and verify what is said and what claims and assertions are made. It's our job to ask the questions. It's our job to hold feet to the fire. It's our job to fact check and cross-reference information. When we fail, there are consequences. By and large, I think we do an okay job of that. We can always do better. But in a more complex world, viewers have access to more information than they've ever had before. A lot of that information is bogus. A lot of it is great, but a lot of it just isn't true, or it's very one-sided, or only telling part of a story, or sometimes just completely false. Another thing that I think is very important is in this climate, with the field so crowded with noise, it's never been more important for responsible journalists to sift through some of that stuff and figure out and report back to viewers about what really are the facts, about what really is happening, because there's so much out there. And you joke about the moon landing. Yes, there's some people who believe the moon landing was fake. Look, we know that's absurd. But nonetheless, I could probably go on today and file a report with all kinds of alleged evidence proving it was, in fact, fake. And I'm sure there's doctored videos. It's all out there. Whatever you want to find, you can find. So I think journalists have to really be determined to cut through some of that stuff.
How do people, the average citizen, cut through all of that and figure out what is the truth and how they look at things?
I think by sifting through as much information as you possibly can and by really checking facts. If you read something that is purported to be a fact, check it, find another source. What we do as reporters routinely is we always have two sources for information that we report, and that's vital. So find two sources, three sources, and Be vigilant. It's interesting because there's so much out there that you can sift through and find, but it's work. You have to dedicate time and effort and be determined to find the truth. Reporters have to do it, and the public has to do it. And it's very easy to find information that confirms your suspicion about something or your belief about something. We can always find information to confirm. The trick is to turn the coin the other way and look at the other side of it and look for information that counters that belief or that claim or that assertion. Let's make sure we look at all sides, not just the one that confirms our belief in something.
Along those lines, how do you connect with the next generation of news viewership, right? The millennials, the Generation Z, everything that's coming behind, how they just take in the news, the channels on their phones that they're looking at versus sitting in front of a TV. How do you connect with them as an anchor?
That's a great question. It's certainly a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity because what that tells you is that the younger people are interested in what's going on and information that may be siloed information, certain topics they're interested in, but they're curious. They want to know, they want to learn something, be exposed to things. Our challenge is to find them on the platforms where they are absorbing information and make sure we're there where they are and make sure that we use those same resources to be in the same space and understand the kinds of things they're concerned about. That doesn't change the fundamental requirement of journalists to sift through information, and not all of it belongs on a broadcast. Not all of it belongs in the New York Times. We have to decide what is the most important information the general public needs to know. There's always going to be specific things people want to look at that may or may not belong on our evening newscast or the network's evening newscast. Young people, I see them on their phones all the time. So we have to make sure we are reaching them there, but it also shows me that they're engaged. We just have to make sure. It's easy to think that they're not engaged because they're not watching television all the time, but they are engaged. So we have to figure out how to engage with them. Somebody who's 22 may not sit down and watch TV news like they used to, but by the time they're in their 30s or 40s, they do. They do tend to come back to it because it's a very convenient way to get the local news and the national news. And we're talking about the things that they're beginning to care about at that age. When you're 21 years old, you're not really thinking about aging parents yet. So healthcare is not an issue. Your health is fine. You haven't bought a house yet. You're not really worried about interest rates. All of these sorts of issues that we talk about later, they're worried that we worry about now, they will come to later.
I guess I was different when I was 21 because when I was working for Al Gore on recounting votes in Central Florida at this time, I was paying more attention then and now than the average person.
Yeah. If you're engaged in politics, you probably are paying more attention than the average person going about their day. So for sure, I think that's true.
Let's look at the 2024 election. There's a lot of criticism on both sides of the news media. From your perspective, how do you think the national and local media did? And what are some lessons learned?
Let me start with the lessons learned. We always have to be deeply engaged in the process and not get swept up with enthusiasm or negativity, but be engaged in looking for the truth and what's really happening as fairly as we possibly can. That means one day it's a story that pounces on Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, and the next day it's a story that is very positive. Whatever the facts are of a particular story, we need to cover that with our lives and just cover the story. I think your perspective on how the media did will depend on your political bent. If you're a Donald Trump supporter, you think, look, from the start, they've been out to get Donald Trump. They were bucking up Kamala Harris and swept up in that enthusiasm. And some truth to that, there was momentum with this. Hey, could be the first woman, first African-American woman, first Asian American woman to be president. So I'm sure there was some of that going on. But if you are a Joe Biden supporter, you think the media just threw him under the bus, I think we tend to look at it based on our perspective and the lens that we're looking through. I've had this discussion with one of my brothers who's really into politics and loves to talk about this stuff, constantly trashing the media and sending me stuff all the time. We're not perfect. We make mistakes. As I like to say, none of us got ordained. We just got hired. We're just people doing a job. And so we do make mistakes. But by and large, you can look at specific things in a news cycle during that campaign and say, well, we did a poor job or we did a good job. On balance, I'd give us a solid B. I wouldn't be so arrogant to say an A, but a B, even a B plus. It felt like we covered the stories pretty well. When questions came out about Biden's fitness for the job, I think the media was pretty hard on him. They asked tough questions. When Donald Trump was indicted and convicted, I think the media reported that pretty fairly and accurately. On balance, I think we followed the story, whatever that story was.
I think as an audience member, my take is don't always follow one view perspective. As you talked about earlier, there's the Fox News side and then there's the MSNBC side, right? And you're getting different audiences. But if you only see the world through your bubble, you're limited. And you're limited in your perspective, whether you're sitting in San Francisco or Nashville. And you got to look at the country through the eyes of everybody else.
There is no question, Jared. I don't watch a lot of cable news. I watch some, obviously, but I flip around. I have watched ABC coverage of something and then flipped over to see what Fox is saying about it or MSNBC. And I'm watching a different event sometimes. It's really, that's the coverage. Wow, that is not my perspective or my take on what happened and why, because they're coming at it from a certain angle. I'm a free speech guy. If somebody wants to do that, okay, that's fine. Try to be truthful. It's not lie. I think that's shameful if you're, but if that's your perspective, okay, that's fine. I like coming at it from the standpoint of being straight on, not leaning left or right, just what is the story? What are the questions that need to be asked? No favoritism, not just to the people, but to a position or a side. And modestly, I pride myself. I don't think anybody could tell whether I'm a equal for a Democrat or a Republican based on my coverage. I just don't think you can. And I know a lot of reporters, most of the people I know are the same way. I think that's fundamental to the job, but that doesn't mean there's not a place for other types of journalism, but people have to know what they're looking at.
Let's talk a little bit about your history as a reporter. About some of your most exciting people you've met and gotten to talk to along the way, and what inspired you about them?
Oh, Jared, there have been so many unique experiences. And I'll tell you, one of the ones I talk about the most because it was such a powerful experience. World War II was always one of the most fascinating periods of history for me to study. I read about it and watch documentaries all the time. I'm watching a phenomenal documentary right now, in fact, on Winston Churchill and his effort during the war. But to travel to Auschwitz in Poland with three Bay Area Holocaust survivors, and one of them survived 3 years at Auschwitz. The other two were at Birkenau, a mile or two away. But to walk through Auschwitz with a woman who's spent 3 years there with the numbers still tattooed on her arm is quite an experience that will never leave you. I'm not Jewish, but you don't have to be Jewish to understand the horror of what happened and also the connection to that horror to this very day for Jews all around the world. And it was a very powerful experience. I traveled, that was somber. There was also a sense of triumph. We overcame it. We stopped him, and Hitler was stopped. I covered Pope John Paul coming to Mexico for his first visit. I was in Mexico City, in a big outdoor stadium. I don't think I've ever been with a group of people who you could sense pure joy and elation. You've been to sporting events where people are going out of their minds. This was different, Jared. This was a level of happiness and excitement, and it was a very powerful experience. That evening that the Columbine tragedy happened, I flew out to Littleton, Colorado, and was there. I didn't want to go really because I knew it would be a gut-wrenching experience, and it was. But it was also very powerful and almost a sacred thing to be trusted to tell their stories. I remember a couple of days in, 2 or 3 days in, there was a knock at the satellite truck door, and satellite villages pop up in these major media events where we all come to town. I climb down the steps, and there's a woman there, and she said, "You came from California, all the way from California to tell our story, didn't you?" And I said, "We did." And she said, "Thank you for coming all this way to tell our story." She handed me a plate of cookies, Jared, fresh baked, We had a little cry and a hug, and I thanked her. I went back into the truck and I showed it to my team. He said, "Look at this, guys." And we all got teary about it. To lighten the mood a little bit so we can get back to work, I said, "With cookies today, if we're here in a week, they'll be back with pitchforks and torches because they'll be tired of the media." This I could go on forever, covering Hurricane Hugo in Charleston, South Carolina, being the last broadcaster on the air. The first one back on after we got power a couple hours later was just an unbelievable experience. Terrifying, absolutely convinced I would not live till the next day. We're under a 2,000-foot transmitter tower. In fairness, we got extremely lucky that tower didn't come down on us. They don't put people there anymore in those storms. The lesson I always learned from these experiences is even in tragic situations, good people always step up and help those in need. There are always rays of light and positive takeaways. People always step up to him. And even in terrible situations, I've always left with a sense of hope.
Wow, that's powerful, and to hear it's really the emotion, that you talked about. One of the things that started this podcast is in one day I was in Livermore, Walnut Creek, and Fairfield, and I asked city managers, "What is the thing you need most?" They said a way to tell their story, because they said the news media only comes if somebody's shot. Talk about that, because you left your statement there talking about there is a ray of hope, there is good out there. Maybe add some context to how does the media cover that and cover the bad news and the good and tell those stories?
I hear that a lot from people, and there's some truth in it, but it's also not true at all. If you watch our newscasts every single day, you will see positive stories every single day. Like to say we're building a better Bay Area, and we're always looking for solutions, people finding ways to solve problems and to deal with issues in our community. Now, sure, top of the newscast tends to be heavy. That's just the way it is. Usually, the news of the day is not the house that didn't burn down, right? It's the out of the ordinary thing. We don't relish it, but that's what often defines news. But as if you watch the newscast, should almost be like flipping through a newspaper or a magazine these days, because so many people don't read newspapers. It gets a little lighter as you go deeper into the newscast, and you will find we do show up to these communities all the time when they're positive, all the time when they're positive stories. Now, sure, when something bad happens, we're there too. And that will tend to lead the newscast or be up top because that tends to be how we define news, something that is breaking or developing or something that is a real problem that needs solving, or if it's an emergency situation. Those are things that tend to top newscasts. But we regularly look for stories that are positive, solution based, or people doing great things in the community. They're in every single newscast we do without fail.
I see a guitar behind you on the wall. You often talk about music being part of your career and story. Talk about that side and how you give back to the community through music.
You're kind of asked, Jared. I've had a passion for music for many years. I'm a singer, and I have an Americana rock and roll band. We perform a lot. I play just with the guitarist as well. And I just recently finished a series at county libraries on the peninsula, which I love. Libraries are places of learning and propose where you can go and really think things through and find information that you're looking for. And I support lots of things in the community through music. I just played a couple of charity events, and I do that a lot with music. We also play Outside Lands, the music festival. We played that last year on the day the Foo Fighters performed. It's a fun way to connect with the audience in a different way. It's fun for me to do, but it's also a chance to express myself. We play original music and some covers, but I write and release music. It's out wherever people buy and enjoy their music. But I view my role as a musician is like being a storyteller. As a journalist, the songs I write tend to be about things. For example, we have a song, we haven't released it yet, but we play it live all the time, called Jam It. It's about an actual homeless woman in Walnut Creek who I know. And I wanted to write a song about that crisis that we're facing in this community and this country. And I think it's a powerful song that touches on how did this happen? How did this happen to an individual? How did it happen to our society? And how can we stand it? What are we going to do about it? I have another song called What Really Matters that I talk about being at Auschwitz. I talk about other things. And it's a reflection of so many things that are setting in our world that I've seen as a journalist, but also how good triumphs over all of that, and decent people rise to help those in need. I view music as a chance to connect with the audience and tell stories in a different way. People come because they'll see me on TV and want to come hear us sing, or they're just curious. And I just think it's another great way to connect with people, which is what we try to do every day in our lives, is connect with fellow human beings. I have a unique platform to connect with people because of my job. So this is another way to do that.
What a fun hobby story. And you brought in the emotion. I look forward to hearing that song when it is released on YouTube or
Yeah, we release them everywhere. Spotify, Apple Music. I have an album out called Out There, and it's got a bunch of these songs on it. Janet will release in this coming year. Just released a Christmas song that's getting played on several radio stations. Dan Ashley Music, for anybody who is interested in knowing more about it, is the website. It's a fun thing to do because I love music, and it's just fun to create it with all these people and to play it and to perform it. But it really is an extension of my job and my role in the community as a public person on television, as a journalist. It lets me connect with people, but also works in tandem with what I do. There are actually lots of reporters and anchors around the country who perform music, who play. And there, Lester Holt, the anchor at NBC, is a musician, plays with a band. The great Bob Schieffer, the venerable CBS White House correspondent, for years had a country band. You'd see him performing around Washington, D.C. It's not as uncommon as you would think, actually.
I love hearing the passion there. A good number of people who listen to this are elected officials or government workers. What advice do you have for them on connecting more to the people and listening to them?
First of all, I would commend them on taking on those responsibilities and working in public interest, because it's not easy work. It can be long hours. You're under a lot of pressure. People are always mad at you. You're never making everybody happy. I would commend them for doing those jobs, because we need people to do those jobs. Somebody has to sit in a meeting and decide what we're going to approve and not approve being built in our community, and all of those decisions, just rubber meets the road decisions that they have to make. I would thank them first for doing it. I would remind them that those of us in the media are not their enemies. We're there in the public interest as well. And our job is to hold their feet to the fire where appropriate, but also to support them when it's appropriate and make sure their message gets out, and the initiatives and projects that they're taking on, and the challenges they're trying to deal with get the kind of publicity they need so they can do a good job. I think we can work together, but at the end of the day, we're the watchdog of government, and we put people in elected positions and government staff positions, anybody working in that capacity. We give them a lot of authority to affect our lives every single day. And with that comes some scrutiny. First, I'd thank them for doing it and encourage them to double down and push even harder to make effective change, make this community a better place.
That's a good message and respectful. I want you to hit me up with another great story of your past. I loved how you talked about the Pope and then heading to Columbine. What else comes to mind? What's a local feeling you could share?
That's a great question. I'll tell you a story that indicated something to me. If you pay attention to it, years ago when Rosie O'Donnell was coming out with her new talk show, they sent me down to LA to interview her. I never met her. And we sat at the theme park in director's chairs with the canvas bottoms and backs with the wooden frame. And we're out there, probably 100 people are watching us because people at the park had stopped to watch what was going on. We had just gotten started, and the canvas part of my chair flipped out of its channel. I fell. I caught myself, but I fell. What Rosie did was fascinating to me, and I used it in the story. It was a little embarrassing. My chair collapsed. And many comedians would flip that, or many comedians would pounce on that and use that as grist for the mill, have a couple of funny one-liners, make everybody laugh, right? What she did was flip it around, and she said, "Thank goodness that happened to you. If it happened to me, all those shows would go, oh, fat Rosie breaks a chair." And she turned it around to make me comfortable. She flipped it around, make a joke about herself. And it was designed to make me comfortable. And that said a lot. So I used that little sequence because I'm doing a profile on her. And didn't that say something about her? It said what kind of person she was,
I
at
love
least
it.
in part. Yeah. So I use that locally. There've been so many. I remember it was national when Sully Sullenberger landed that plane in the Hudson River on that January day, as I recall. I was the second order to interview him after Katie Couric. And we became friends after that. And I don't stay in touch with him as I once did. That was a chance to tell a national story with a local perspective because he lived in the Bay Area. And so that was a great privilege to get to do that and get to know him. I remember the first time I interviewed him, he wasn't great as an interviewer, as an interviewee. And one of the things that spoke to how smart and dedicated he was is he knew he needed to be better if he was going to become a national figure and a speaker. Where I give him great credit is he did become very good at it, and he really became an expert. Years ago, two young children were killed by a driver who was under the influence of drugs and gambling. It was a terrible tragedy. Not long after, I sat on the sofa of the parents of those kids, Bob and Carmen Pack. What a difficult thing to do, to sit and talk with parents whose whole world had just been shattered, but they wanted to call attention to this issue of driving under the influence. Uh, I was honored that they trusted me in this moment of unbelievable grief and heartbreak to tell the story. Jared, that is one thing that has never been lost on me. When people trust you, even this small thing we're doing here, you wanted to interview me. I'm incredibly flattered to be asked. And yet I'm trusting you to do a fair job with me. Whenever you get people on your show and they're trusting you to interview them and treat them fairly, you take that trust seriously, right? That means something. So you can relate to that. I think anybody can relate to that. I've always been grateful for that. I've always been mindful. Privilege to go out in the world and see things and talk to people and then get to come back and put them on television and tell people what I learned today. What a great job. What a great opportunity.
As a news anchor and a public figure, you have a lot to bring back to our community, to the Bay Area that you call home. How do you use your job to contribute back and make this community better?
Thanks for asking, Jared. I'm so fortunate to have a job that gives me a unique place in the community. And I have always, for 40 years, tried as best I can to use that platform for very positive things to make a difference. It's always flattering when people want me to be involved in a charitable organization and to raise money or awareness for worthy causes. To that end, I'm deeply involved as a board member with Friends of Camp Concord. We send underserved kids to summer camp at Lake Tahoe. In the 29 years I've hosted a golf tournament to raise money for that effort, we've sent over 12,000 kids, all expenses paid. Court appointed special advocates. I'm on the board of that as well, where we help kids who've been removed from their homes because of abuse and neglect. I started my own foundation using music and my place as a journalist in the community called Rock the Casa. I stage an annual rock concert with terrific headliners like Patti LaBelle, Rick Springfield, Cheap Trick, Aria Speedwagon, Eddie Money, Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, and others, to raise money for these causes. Also, Big Brothers Big Sisters and Boys and Girls Club are beneficiaries of that. I've also been very involved in AIDS Walk for 30 years and getting involved with the AIDS Memorial Grove in San Francisco. It's just such a unique chance and flattering that people would ask me to support different causes and be involved. It's the least you can do. If things have worked out pretty well for you and you're doing okay, what a nice thing in any walk of life to be able to make a difference and help out where you can. And I should do much more than I do, but I'm grateful for the chance to do what I have been able to do.
That's great. I think it's important to give back and make sure you add me to the list. Rock the Casa. I love some of those 80s performers who are still out there. Good name. I grew up with their music. I'm happy to come out, and I really appreciate you being here today. Dan Ashley of ABC 7 News.
Jared, you're kind to have me on. What a terrific series of conversations. you do. I've been watching a number of them, and congratulations on the Capstone Conversations. I think you're doing something really important, which is leading civilized, informative dialogue. You're trying to educate folks and introduce them to subjects and subject matter they might not know much about or would like to know more about. But you're a journalist in that sense. And I think it's terrific what you're doing. So I'm super flattered to come on here. Great to have me on. Thank you.
Thank you. Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Ash, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.